Good afternoon. I hope you're enjoying your lunch. We're going to settle in to the lunch portion of this morning. And my name is Bruce Wimbish, Greater Columbus Sports Commission Senior Communications Manager and first-year member of the Women's Commission. I would like to thank you for being on this learning journey, but also to thank you for all of the sponsors for today that have made this conversation, this opportunity to learn possible. We've been asked to speak not only about why we're passionate about joining the Women's Commission, but also what we've learned today. And for brevity, I'm going to try to combine those. And similar to President Drake, I cannot speak on equity. I can't say that I've lived it or know what it's like, but I also can say that I do not know what it's like of the inequity for women, and especially women of color. So when I remember back to filling out the application for the Women's Commission, I thought about women overall, but I thought of my mom. And speaking from the heart a little bit of her being from a women-headed household and raising myself and my sister, and just knowing and thinking about all the ways that she raised me to have the sensitivities needed just to be not a good man, but a good person. And I think to my wife and how what my mom did in raising me built me to be somebody that was acceptable to her and how she tolerates me. But now we're raising two daughters, 4 and 9 months. And so all of this work was even more extremely relevant to me at the time. And I just remember getting emotional filling out the application. And then when I think about what I learned today is it's something that I've always known, but I have not been able to crystallize it the way it was today. And I think as far as being a person of color, but also women, the emotional tax that we all bear and that burden and not being able to come to work as our full selves. And so I'm very excited about the panel today about creating workplaces that thrive. And so I'd like to introduce Todd Allen of Accenture, bringing over 22 years of experience to this conversation. He's passionate about this work and wants to ensure that Accenture is doing the right thing for its employees. Ed Elliott of Huntington, bringing expertise in total rewards. He believes in the importance of data, which gives us critical insights into this work on gender and pay equity, adding the importance of elevating awareness on this topic so that it becomes part of our everyday life and decision-making process. Teresa Harris of TMH Solutions. Teresa has been in the IT field for over 30 years, and she also brings experience in nonprofits, board leadership, and the corporate lens, as well as leading companies through the startup, survival, turnaround, and growth modes. Eric Karolak of Action for Children, trained as an economist and with the background in women's workforce participation rates. Eric brings expertise in both nonprofit leadership, the role of childcare in the conversation of workplace, and then elevating the role and importance of trained childcare field. And then Heather Whaling of Gebben Communication. Heather brings the lens of an entrepreneur and small business owner to the conversation. She's both passionate and a leader in paid family leave policies, which we'll talk about on the panel. And then she's also an appointed commissioner with the Women's Commission. So I look forward to the conversation with these leaders, and now I'd like to invite Todd Allen from Accenture to the podium.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. And Bruce, I appreciate the thoughtful introductions. I also just want to start by thanking Shelley and Shannon Ginther for just this opportunity to participate and monitor the panel. I think what we're going to really try to bring is some real-life examples of how we've put these equal pay initiatives and programs into place in organizations here in Central Ohio. In a moment, I'm going to share some of what we've done at Accenture. I've got a brief presentation. As others have indicated, the materials, both the presentation and some research that we've done with Accenture are on the jump drives. So I'm going to go through the presentation at warp speed so that we can really focus on the the discussion and the perspectives from the other panelists, but you do have them on the jump drives. Before I get to what we've done at Accenture to get to equal, I just want to share some of why I'm passionate about this topic. The first is that in the past several years, I've had the opportunity to operate and to fill what we call at Accenture HR business partner roles. So these are roles where we're really the connection with the business leaders and our kind of back office HR. And in those roles, I've seen firsthand in the data and in the situations with many employees, the discrepancy and the differences, both along the way we're paying our women and in some cases are ethnically diverse. And the thing that I think is, again, kind of drives my passion around this is that we've got the sponsorship, we've got the affordability, which is critical to make differences and to go and correct those things. I've seen this really come to the forefront in the last several years with really strong leadership from our Chief HR Officer, Ellen Shook, and our North America CEO, Julie Sweet. And having that top-down really expectation to get to equal and to fix things is so critical in making it happen. So that's the first thing. The second is that on a personal level, and my daughter is finishing her first year at Ohio State. As of today, I'm picking her up after this engagement and moving her out of her dorm. But I really, want her to have equal opportunity when it comes to career, and I certainly want her to be able to earn, equal pay and be recognized and rewarded the same as her male colleagues. So it hits me from a couple different angles, and it really drives my passion on this subject. So as I said, I do have a few slides to share. I'm going to click through these pretty quickly, and I need to thank Jenny Brody for all the work that she's done for Accenture, both in the area of research, and you'll see the results of her work in the slides, as well as helping me to prepare for the presentation today. So thank you. All right, so, whoops, let me see. And despite working for a technology company for over 22 years. So a couple things from an Accenture standpoint, and you'll see this is a theme. We have a public commitment to get to equal workforce by 2025. This is something that we've published and we've committed externally to get there. And you can see with the graph in the bottom left, with our total workforce, we've got a lot of ground to cover in the next several years. But here again, this is something that we have committed to. We measure it, we hold leadership accountable, and we will achieve this. We also have come out public with having 25% of our managing directors, so the most senior individuals in our company, 25% will be women by 2020, and equal or pay equity between men and women. So part of the moral of this story and the message to get across is we are publicly committing to this, we measure, and we put these statistics out on a routine basis. So from a commitment to advancing women, there are a few things that we are committed to here as well. So sponsorship, and this is something that several of the presenters earlier this morning really focused on, but we want to ensure that our most senior women advance to roles that are responsible for profit and loss. And 80% of these have been promoted or have expanded their responsibility. So real decision makers when it comes to making decisions around the direction of the organization and where we're headed. Launching initiatives that empower women with in-demand skills. This is especially important to us because so much of what we deliver for our clients and our accounts is in the field of technology. And we all know that it's really competitive to attract the best talent from a technology perspective, and to do that with a focus on gender and ethnicity. The next point is just around, again, transparency by annually publishing our workforce demographics, and then collaborating across business and government. And this is a prime example of where we're committed to not only focus on doing these things and sharing internally within Accenture, but also with broader communities in which we work and live. So, and then this last slide, and then I'll get to some of the research, how we're getting there with pay equity. So we've got that deep commitment that I described a few minutes ago, leadership top down. That enables our HR professionals and our line leaders to really have the affordability, and I'll use that term multiple times. We plan ahead for it. We know that we're going to need to make some changes and some fixes, so we plan that into our entire compensation process. We conduct, global reviews. So we have independent reviews. We engage outside counsel to complete those reviews, and then to share back what we need to do and where we have instances of inequity that need to be fixed, and we fix it. The other point I would make here is just around achieving and maintaining. And maintaining, I think, is the most important part here. Is that it's not a one-time effort or one-time and done, especially in a business like ours where we experienced attrition rates upwards to 16, 18, 20%. And those are by design just because of the nature of our business. We've got a constant influx of people at the bottom of the pyramid, and then people that are coming in experienced roles, and it's important to make sure that we've got that equity. Okay, sorry. I feel tethered to this thing. I'm used to walking around. No, this is good. I'll stick here. The point of that being is that it's not a one and done. It's built into the processes, and it's something that we look at every year. This is where I'm going to speed up. So if there's doubt, and I know that sponsorship is so important, but what I'm going to share with you here is just some of the research that we've done with Accenture. If you've got any more convincing to do of senior leaders in your organization, I think you've been armed with an arsenal of kind of facts and research today, and hopefully this will complement that. This first point here, 9 out of 10 companies since the year 1900 were founded only by men. And you can see, and I really I shared with you my story, but the Melinda Gates quote I think is really powerful too. We're sending our daughters into a workplace designed for our not designed for our dads. So women, and we've heard stats from a number of the other presenters, 24% less likely to reach manager than men are. For every 100 men who reach manager, only 65 women do. This is probably debatable because I've heard a couple of statistics across the board here today, but our research shows that a young woman starting university today will be 69 years old before the pay gap in the U.S. closes. Over our dead bodies, right? Only 14 of the global Fortune 500 have a woman CEO. As part of our research, we surveyed over 22,000 employees in 34 different countries. And what we saw in the responses to those surveys was that some environments are more conducive, and some environments and characteristics of those environments where women are doing well. The first is where they love their work, so where they're passionate and really engaged about the work that they do, where they feel more satisfied with their careers, where they're more likely to aspire to be in leadership, and are 5 times more likely to advance to senior manager. We basically, from an Accenture perspective, we roll our efforts and our getting to equal into these three categories. In the interest of time, I'm going to click through these very quickly. From a bold leadership perspective, it's publishing those diversity targets. The second point here, I think, is really critical. At least we need to see at least one woman, and it makes a huge difference as part of that leadership team. Whether it's a local office, whether it's our North America leadership team, we've got to see one woman at that leadership table. And then the last point here is just around leadership, holding the teams accountable. I've commented on that already. Comprehensive action. I love the stories that we've heard today about parental leave. We too have adopted that, and it applies to both our male and female employees. And then offering a women's network. We've got a very strong women's network. We call them employee resource groups, and our women's group is probably one of the strongest. And then lastly, just around empower and trust. This first bullet point, you'll see respect for the individual. This is one of our core values that we hold very high. And again, this is an area where I've heard zero tolerance come up earlier in the day. We have zero tolerance when it comes to any type of sexual harassment or racial harassment or discrimination, and it is a stark contrast, especially for those of you in the audience who have been in HR business partner or HR type roles. And in the past, I think we've really tried to find the best solution in the gray somewhere. And at least for Accenture, it's no longer in the gray. Zero tolerance means zero tolerance. And I've learned from this over the past year since we've really come across with the zero tolerance, and it does put you in an uncomfortable spot because the gray is not where we operate when it comes to these matters anymore. Training and development, obviously very important in making sure that they have the opportunity, and then technology-enabled flexibility. So being able to use video conferencing or other technology to be able to enable that flexibility. So those are the things that I wanted to share. At this point, I'd like to invite the other panelists to join me on stage, and we'll engage in the discussion. As they're coming up, I would just ask each of the panelists if you would take a moment to introduce yourself, and then just comment briefly on what it is that you feel passionate about from either professional or personal perspective as it relates to the equal pay.
Hi, I'm Ed Elliott. I'm the head of Total Rewards at Huntington Bank. Been with Huntington Bank for 1 year now. What I'm passionate about with this is I can change conversations. I have that ability in my role. And in my role, we also allocate a lot of money. So an example of that would be during our annual merit exercise, we'll spend on a normal 2% budget about $15 or $20 million. Well, I like to make sure that that $15 or $20 million gets spent in the best way possible. So I take a lot of pride in working on these issues to make sure that my partners are aware, the business leaders are aware of how we can best spend that, allocate that money.
Teresa Harris with TMH Solutions. It is indeed an honor for me to be here with you today. My passion is giving in the community and helping others. And by others, that means anyone that I would come in contact with. TMH Solutions was founded in 2010. And the reason that I started the company, I had a daughter who was 16, and during the years I was traveling all the time. I would leave on Sunday and I'd get home on Friday morning. And I realized one day when I was looking up at the curtains to understand where I was, I realized that time was passing me by. I had a 16-year-old daughter, and she was going to go to school, and I was not going to have these years back again. So it was important for me to make sure that I was, while I was raising my daughter, fortunately, Oracle, who I worked with, decided to make me a business partner if I found my successor. And I was able to do that. I became an Oracle business partner for applications. And then the company grew and grew and grew. And we have 3 tenets, 3 things that we focus in on. It's collaboration. Collaborations with our customers and our strategic business partners to deliver high-quality, cost-effective solutions. By that, we use our local marketplace to give consultants to our customers. They don't get on a plane. They work in our community. And finally, to empower. We want to make sure that we make a difference and that we provide quality work for our consultants so that they thrive in our industry. And we hire men, women, you name it. We do a great job, and we have a great organization, have great people who help me run it. Thank you.
I think each of us comes to this issue with from all sorts of different backgrounds and perspectives. My daughter's in an exam right now, some other building at this university, and so I have a personal interest in that sort of sense. But I think the thing that I'd like to emphasize to you, all with other organizations that have taken this pledge, is really about Action for Children and why it is so crucial that we address this pay equity issue. My staff is 70% female. The work we do in the community is with moms and dads, but also child care providers, a lot of work with child care providers, and they are more than 90% female. And the effect of all of that work is to improve the quality of life, the quality of the early childhood experiences of our young children, the next generation. And so how we succeed or fail on pay equity and other ways that we make our workplaces inclusive is essential to our work. We can do everything we can with the populations that we work with and be successful, but if we continue to live in this kind of environment, their opportunities will be diminished. What they will be able to accomplish will be diminished. So we live in an environment that is affected by this, and I saw the opportunity recently with others on my team to take action as a result of the Columbus commitment of the Women's Commission, so that's why we're here.
Hi, my name is Heather Whaling. I am CEO and founder of Gebben Communication. I'm also a commissioner for the Women's Commission, and I'm on the board of the Women's Fund of Central Ohio. So I spend a lot of time in and around this type of work. The motivator or the driver for me is economic self-sufficiency for women. I think we can tackle a lot of the problems we face in society if women are economically self-sufficient. So the other piece that I think ties into that is workplace policies need to be updated. The way it's always been done in business is not the way it needs to be done. And so I love that Gebben, my company, has become a platform where I can experiment and test different ways that we could do workplace policies and then have the opportunity to share what we've learned through that process.
I'm going to jump right into the questions. And the first question that I've got, I really direct this towards Heather and Ed. It's under the topic of leadership insight, but can you share specific programs or practices in this space that have really helped you accelerate progress?
Okay, I'll start. So I started a year ago at Huntington. The first thing that I was asked to take a look at from our Women's Business Resources Group was an enhancement to the maternity leave policy. And I remember, going through the proposal and saying, I think we can do better than this. And I alluded earlier, sometimes it's our job to change conversations. What we had at the time was a 6-week short-term disability policy that new mothers would get, and then we had a 1-week family time off for all new parents, so 7 weeks. And it was kind of easy to think that, to see that we had to do something better than that. Easy because, one, I'm the father of 4 great kids. At least on most days they're great. And I think they still average to great when I take the bad days into consideration. But I know how ready my wife was to return to the workplace in week 7. I know how ready my kids were to be handed off to somebody to be taken care of at week 7. So I wanted to try to do better. The other thing that came to mind is I just spent the last 5.5 years before I came to Huntington up in Canada. In Toronto, the world's most multicultural city, and also the land of where you have 1- and 2-year maternity leaves. So I wanted to do better than this. The other thing that I wanted to do is I wanted a policy that wasn't just going to mean something to the 300 or 400 mothers that we had at Huntington every year, because we have other parents at Huntington every year, at least another 300 or 400. And then we have a whole bunch of other people that need flexibility to handle life's events. So what we were able to do is really double what we were able to provide to new mothers, up to 12 to 14 weeks. So not quite as rich as E and Y. We couldn't quite get there, but 12 to 14 weeks, we were able to add 6 weeks to family time off from 1, greatly expanded that. But we had an interesting twist. The last 2 weeks that we provided, we call a caregiver time off. It can be used in conjunction with the birth of a child by either a new mother or another parent. But it can also be used by every colleague, every 16,000 of our colleagues, for when they need flexible time to deal with life's events. So if they have a sick child or a sick spouse or a sick parent, they can take up to 2 weeks off every 2 years. What was neat about that is what started off as a maternity enhancement turned into a benefit for all colleagues at Huntington. And what was neat about that is so they all felt part of the new policy. The hardest part that we had on getting this through at Huntington, making this change, was the cost. About $4 million at Huntington. About half of that was hard dollars. So think about the temps that we would get into the branches to backstaff when somebody was gone. And about half of it was what we would call soft dollars. So in the head office, there are specialist jobs. You're never going to be able to replace them for the 2 or the 6 or the 12 weeks, so you go without that. But what was neat was when we started having conversations about how you replace people, and you say, today you might need to take time off to be with your new child. Well, somewhere down, and I'm happy to roll up my sleeves and pick up the slack and provide you the flexibility that you need at this time, because I know somewhere down the road I'm probably going to need some flexibility, and you'll do the same for me. So what was really neat is the culture change that came about as everybody kind of thought about this. We're in it together, and we're here to, it wasn't Huntington providing, this new flexibility. It was all of us providing each other the flexibility.
That's great.
So my story, there were sort of a couple different things that all happened around the same time. So when I have a son who will be 5 this June, and when he was born 5 weeks early and spent the first 13 days in the NICU. And we had been life-flighted about 2 hours away from here, so we were nowhere close to home. And during that time, I was able to stay singularly focused on what I needed to do to get him healthy. I never had to worry about if I would have a job to go back to or if I would get paid for that time out of the office, because I'm the boss. Of course I'd have a job to go back to, and of course I'd get paid. But that's not reality for most American workers. Only 13% of Americans have access to paid family leave. And that's shameful. And at the same time, after my son, my company now is 25 people. At the time, that was 5 years ago, we were about 4 people. So we were much different. We didn't have a lot of policies then. But we started to grow, and I had someone else on my team who was pregnant, and I had to figure out what did paid leave look like for us. At that time, so this is back in 2016 or so, if you remember, Facebook and Netflix and Etsy and all these big, tech companies were getting a lot of positive coverage for providing really great paid leave benefits. And it seemed to me that paid leave is too important for it to be just a fancy Silicon Valley perk or for it to be luck of the draw. So as I thought about how I and my own company could provide paid family leave, and keep in mind we're a much smaller company than most of the companies you've heard from on this stage today, we provide 10 weeks of paid family leave to all new moms and new dads, whether they give birth or adopt. Plus, we provide a 2-week transition period for all new moms and new dads. So that piece, to me, we were able to help support new families. I'm a small business owner, so I did the math. Paid family leave is good for families and it's good for business. And it's also something where obviously all of us in this room believe in equal pay. I also think that we have to believe in equal benefits. And so it was just as important to me that new dads were included equally in our policy as new moms.
All right, great. Thank you both. Next question I'm going to direct to Teresa and Eric. So this is in the area of modern workforce. How are your workplaces evolving? And what are the most immediate issues for your organization to address as the bar is raised to secure and keep talented employees in an increasingly competitive world?
So I would say the issues that we face today is communication and how we respond to one another. And now that our workforce is more global, it's also understanding how others think and feel and how they respond differently than the way that we do. So I would say that that tends to be an issue because in information technology, we have, people from all over the world, and their needs are different. We have young people, and we have people who've been around, and this is their second career when they come to us. So I would say communication and making sure that we use the proper means of communication and that we do it effectively. I would also say virtual versus on-premise. Virtual, meaning do we allow people to work from home? Do we allow them to stay away from the team, or should we have them all in one place? And today we're working through that right now. We've picked up a client that we're working with on-premise. And what we found is that there's no communication. They'll walk through the office, see people standing there, and never say hello. I don't know what that does for your culture, but I know back at our office, we're always talking, we're always IMing, we're always, and if we had to stay there long term, it would be a difficult place. So what we've decided to do is that we're going to change the culture. They're not used to seeing women, they're not used to seeing African American women or African American men. So we're putting our footprint on that to make sure that they're aware that we have feelings, we have knowledge and wisdom just like everyone else has. We also want to be flexible, and we want to encourage a healthy workforce. Today, more than ever, I sit on the Mid-Ohio Food Bank Board, and I know how important it is to have healthy foods to prepare for your family. But if you're not there and you're absent, you don't know what your child is having, or your family, if you're not there. So it's important to be flexible. It's important in the workplace to provide independence. You have to trust yourself and your hiring practices, and you have to be able to trust others. And develop your people, develop your employees, your consultants, whoever is under your organization. And it's very important to offer that all the time, not some of the time, to everyone and not to some of the people. Because when I started my career years ago, one of the things that we had was mentors. We have them today, but it was a formalized process. And every time that I didn't understand something, I could go to that person and talk to them in the workplace about why certain things happened the way that they did. That mentor was not my champion. That mentor was there to help me along the way. And if I wanted to get to a different client, like they never had women on General Motors as a client years ago, I wanted to know how to get there. And they paved that way for me. And sometimes they were women, and most of the time that they were women, most of the time that they were women. And it was very important for us to have those role models. We also had all African Americans present. And that was important to be able to say, I can do this. So today that's very important. Oftentimes when I tell young men and women, you will be running this company, they laugh, huh? And I remember that was the exact same response I had years ago when my district manager said, you can run this office one day. Didn't think he meant me. And today, I've run large businesses and I run my own business, and I can tell others that it is possible.
Excellent.
The workplace is changing in so many ways, as you referenced, Teresa. But I think we are really dealing with an age-old problem, which is the undervaluation of women's work, of the work of women, and especially women of color. So, my agency is focused on changing the behaviors, the skills, the strategies of the adults who have the biggest impact on young children's lives, their parents, other caregivers, child care teachers, and so forth. And that work is really important. 85% of the brain's architecture is developed before you get to school. It's also very hard work. If you've ever hosted a birthday party for a 2-year-old, yeah, this one doesn't end. And there are educational outcomes required. So this is hard work, it's important work, and it's grossly underpaid work. The average child care teacher in the United States, and it's not any different in Ohio, makes about $10 an hour. 40% of our workforce is claiming public assistance in some fashion or another. And that's shameful, right? And so this is an age-old problem about valuing what women do, care of the next generation, right? And we need to address and improve the stature of that work. A challenge that we are facing is that as more requirements and standards are placed on the workforce, there isn't a increase in the remuneration to that workforce. 25 years ago, a study was done on one segment of our workforce that showed very low pay rates, and it was updated just recently, and the title of the study was Worthy Work, Unworthy Wages. And they retitled the report, Worthy Work, Still Unworthy Wages. So we need to be thinking about how we drive resources and improvements to that workforce. Most of the child care workforce doesn't have benefits. Health insurance is a rarity. And so part of what I looked at in frankly, the challenge that was put before all of us by the Women's Commission was, well, what can we do? I'm a labor economist, an economist with a bent toward labor by training, and so that Women's Equal Pay Day was in April was not news to me, and it was pretty daunting to think about that. How do you get from April to December 31st, or that Latina Equal Pay Day is in November, right? I think it's in November. How do you get? That's a huge gap. How can you possibly do anything as an individual? But the thing we all did last November, or whenever it is you each signed, that pledge was to say, well, we're going to figure out what we can do now. And so at our agency, we made a commitment to the living wage. That's an equal pay measure of sorts. It's an equity issue. And so now we will pay $15 and no less to our staff. And it's a sign of saying this is valuable work. The work of our sector is important. We did some other things around leave sharing, and we decided that 13% was an abomination for paid leave, and with Heather saying, just do the math will work out, we looked at that. I don't know if we actually got the math to work out. I am a little bit worried about that, but I am 100% certain we did the right thing. And so we now have just 2 weeks of parental leave. I hope to make it more, but it's our first step. And we also, and a number of other measures too, so I don't mean to go on at length, but the challenge to doing that, of course, is finding the resources to accomplish it, but it's important to take the step, especially in our field, to send a strong message about the value of this work.
All right, great. Just in the interest of time, Ed, I'll direct this question to you, and it's a comment or a topic that we've heard multiple times today, just around culture. So where's your organization on the culture reset journey?
My CEO, Steve, likes to burst into your office unexpectedly, kind of like Kramer coming into Seinfeld's apartment. It's like all of a sudden he's standing in front of me. He brought this up last week as I was getting ready for this panel, and wanted me to take him through the work that we had done over the past couple of months, which I did. And he said, this is really good. I didn't realize we had done as much, but it's important work. And he said, I'd like to talk to the board about this. Can we get it on an agenda? I said, absolutely. It'll be on the July agenda to talk with the committee about it. So when it gets to that level, and when your CEO cares, and I think most of our CEOs in this room care about this, when they want to talk to the board about it, I think it gets to the level where action is going to happen. And I sure as hell don't want to be the person that a year from now hasn't shown progress on this front when it's at that level. So that's what I would say in short of how important this is to Huntington.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We've got a diverse slate of organizations represented in the room here. So Heather, Eric, any advice or any unique challenges that we might see in nonprofit or small companies?
This might be the PR person in me, but I would flip it. Instead of saying the unique challenge, I think the real opportunity for small to mid-sized businesses is our size. So large companies have to go through a lot of legal hurdles and cost-benefit analysis and risk assessment and all these things that take a lot of time when I decided I wanted to have a paid family leave policy, I did a little bit of research and didn't have to run it by anybody and just made the policy. So there's a real opportunity for the smaller organizations in the room to really be leading on these types of initiatives, because you don't have to jump through as many hoops as some of the bigger organizations have to jump through. You don't have as many resources also, so there is that. But speed is something that I think can really work to your benefit at this moment in time. The other piece that I would say is a benefit or an opportunity of a small business, and I think this applies for any size, is to share your experience. I was at South by Southwest earlier this year, and Andy Roddick, the tennis player, is doing really incredible work with his foundation. And he said this line, he said, success without sharing is actually failure. And I thought that that was really powerful. So when I rolled out our paid family leave policy, I talked about it every opportunity I could get. And business owners kept coming to me asking, how did you do it? How did you make the math work? How did, all different types of, all the questions that you have when you think about putting a leave policy in place. And I realized that one of the first barriers was they just didn't know where to start. So we created a database. So if you go to rewritetherules.co, it's a crowdsourced database of paid leave policies. Anybody can go on there. You can search by length of leave or size of company and see policies that have been developed and vetted and put into place by companies of all different sizes. And that, I think that was helpful for me in really understanding the power of each individual person to tell your story and share the experiences and what has worked and what has not worked, so others can sort of leapfrog your lessons. But I think by being vocal about what you've done and what has worked for your organization, you will then help inspire change and help other organizations put those best practices into place.
Excellent. Anything else to add?
Well, I'm glad you framed it in terms of an opportunity, because it is.
Yep.
And but there's still the challenge of making it work. And I work for a board, so I have to deal with that too. And I think the thing I would say is you just have to have the courage to try. And some of that is about being open to what your staff are saying to you, and also looking to guides and catalysts. You were certainly that, the Women's Commission in putting the pledge before us, and the Women's Fund of Central Ohio actually in helping us, catalyze us to think of it as a broader initiative. Kim Anderson, my consultant at Action for Children, who's helped us put that welcoming workplace initiative together, reached out to other resources to be able to do that. And but at the end of the day, this stuff has to make sense. You run a business, a small business especially, there's often very little margin, especially with nonprofits. And funders aren't interested in funding your back office, your admin, your benefits. Funders want increasingly to pay for performance. And so you have to do some work at figuring out how that math, I like the idea of thinking of it as an opportunity, but it's also serious, and you have to do the work behind the math.
So last year when we were at like 20 people, we had 3 people out at the same time on leave. So for a small business, that's a financial challenge. But we had to, there was certainly some planning that we had to put in place and budgeting that we needed to do. The nice thing is that you typically, when it comes to paid leave, have some advance notice that this is coming and you can plan for it. It's not like someone gets pregnant and is out tomorrow. So you've got a few months at least to try and figure out how to make it work. But it can be done. It requires some planning and some thought. But I think the line I always like to say is take the time and do the math for yourself. There's a lot of hyperbole out there right now from people who say it's cost prohibitive, but if you actually take the time to do the math yourself and to look at your own organization's budget, you can figure out how to make it work. And don't forget, don't discount the cost savings of retention of talent, or if someone comes back from work too soon and makes a huge costly mistake, what could the implication be? That math on that side matters also.
All right, very good, thank you. And appreciate the framing that as opportunity, that's great. We're getting close on time, so I think what I'll do next is just ask each of the panelists to share, kind of that one piece of important advice that you would give to the audience around, making the pay equity happen.
Sure. My advice would be not to try to do it yourselves, not to make it an HR event, but try to really talk about it within the organization so that people are aware of the issues, aware of some of the things they can do, and really empower them. What I tell you is I got one of the best phone calls I've had in 30 years on this topic, and it made me really believe that we can fix this together. And we were hiring, we had a new hire coming up, and it was a talent acquisition coordinator that called me to say, I'm really uncomfortable with this new hire and what we're starting them at. And I said, why? And she said, well, you know, they're really good, and the offer is about $25,000 less than somebody else we brought in to a similar role a couple of months ago. And I said, okay. And they said, the only difference is this is a female. And I said, do you think there is experience? And she said, absolutely. I think they might even be better. I said, well, why don't you call that hiring manager? And the hiring manager, and she said, well, what if they, you know, don't agree? And I said, well, then I'll make the phone call, but why don't you try first? I didn't have to make that phone call. They called, and it was just something the hiring manager hadn't been thinking of. And what I liked about it was we can't do this ourselves. We need everybody kind of thinking of these opportunities to get this better, and that's how we're going to win.
I would say to get involved in your communities. I believe in working with nonprofit organizations because when you show up there, your name tag and your title goes away. You're there to do meaningful work. I think you need to support nonprofit organizations. This is just one of the ways. Nonprofit organizations, because you have dollars, you have a voice, and you have talent. And it's important that you understand what's going on in the community. You don't understand what a sustainable wage means to someone until you're standing in their shoes and finding out that, you know, if I make $15 or $18 an hour, some other benefit is going to be taken away from my family. So you won't know that sitting in your glass offices, but you will find that out when you're working in the community. Also, communities that advocate for women and for equal pay, such as WELD. I've been a member of WELD for a number of years, and it has been very helpful to me because I can now take my place at the table and I can lean in. I also can bring others to the table who say, how do I get to that point and how do I make my way? It's a place where, yes, I have a voice, but there are many other ways within WELD and some of the other great organizations in the city that we have who stand up for women and for pay equity.
I love what you said. It's fantastic. Think about nonprofits. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, right? You know, I feel very uncomfortable up here, and not just because I'm a overweight, middle-aged, white, cis male, but because as confident as I am that we did the right thing, I know it's not enough. I know 2 weeks, that's palpable, but at least it gets us in the 13%, and it's a place to build from, and it's better than what many of the folks who come to us for employment are able to get otherwise. So you have to find a place to begin, and you have to say, this is important. And you know, I don't feel like we're models necessarily. I feel like we're more specimens, because we did the same thing you did, right? We took the pledge and got to work thinking about how to make it happen. It's that first step that I think is so important, and as you go through each piece of it, each piece begins with a step. So Journey of 1,000 Miles begins with a single step.
The other piece I would say is when you're looking at equity, we've talked a lot about equal pay today. We've obviously talked about paid leave on this panel, but look at all of the different policies that you have in your company and look at those through a gender lens and how can some of those maybe be changed. It could be things like flexible location, or does the person actually have to be at their desk from the hours of 9 to 5, or can you have flexible scheduling? There are lots of other ways that you can support women advancing in their careers and to create a more equitable workplace as a whole, separate just from the dollars and cents of compensation. So I would encourage you to look at all of your policies through a gender lens and see what can be tweaked to help women as a whole.
All right, very good. Well, I guess at this point, I want to thank the panelists for their thoughtful responses and their insights and practical ways that we can put these practices and policies in place. So thank you once again. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you to Todd and the panelists for building on our conversations that we've had all day today and sharing where you are on this journey. A thank you to everyone who's been in attendance today for your commitment to this conversation. I'd also like to thank the sponsors again, AEP, the Columbus Partnership, Huntington, L Brands, Nationwide, Ohio Health, Baker Hostetler, Cardinal Health, EMH&T, GBQ, and the Ohio State University Fawcett Center for making this possible, for those of you who have signed the pledge, and to making this a free day of learning for each of us. Our hope is that today we spark new ideas for each of you and really also have this shared momentum of where we are in the community and our forward motion in this conversation. To take your ideas and what you learned back to your colleagues, back to your leadership team, and take that first step or take the 100th step, but to continue to move forward. On behalf of the Commission, we want to continue to hear from you. We want to know what are the tools and resources that you need to be able to take the next step. We will be sending a survey out to all of those that were here today, so please let us know. We're very genuine on that. Our hope is that we can continue to convene conversations throughout 2018, maybe not in the same format, but maybe through some brown bag lunches, lunch and learn, so some opportunity to learn the tactics and to be an honest and open conversation with one another. And we're going to continue to outreach to employers who aren't in the room, to those who have not yet signed the pledge. So my ask is that each of you to continue to be an ambassador within your own organization, but to be an ambassador in our community for this work around pay equity. So on behalf of the First Lady and the Commissioners, thank you for being with us today, and hopefully you enjoy the sunshine this afternoon. Thank you.